You're watching Jim Cantelon Today Television. This is Bible Study for the 21st century. So welcome, friends. Jim Cantelon here. Christmas is just around the corner. I can't believe it, but it is. And a little later in the show, I'm going to have a special promo run for a gifting opportunity that I'm offering you to help some very valuable home care workers in Zambia and Malawi. Very interesting. But first of all, we'll take a break and then we'll get back to our teaching. So, friends, we are in Matthew chapter 23, and last program we got into the first part of the chapter where Jesus is very firm in his rebuke of the scribes and Pharisees and their legalistic approach to the matters of the kingdom of heaven and their almost compulsive focus on the law of Moses. Jesus, of course, not made himself very popular with these religious leaders when he did this, but now he's taking it further. I started with the first of 7 woes before we ended the last program, but he pronounces 7 woes on these religious teachers, and boy, they're they're pretty blunt. Okay, let's pick it up in verse 15. This is the second woe. Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You travel over land and sea to win a single convert, and when you've succeeded, you make them twice as much a child of hell as you are. Now, this is pretty in your face. I don't think any of us would appreciate anyone rebuking us that way. It's a stern rebuke from Jesus. But there's a nuance here that you can miss if you don't have a little bit of background in terms of the culture and the worldview of the people of Jesus' day. And so let me help you with this. The Pharisees and the religious culture in general used to refer to Gentiles as, quote, children of hell, unquote, children of hell. So anyone like me, maybe you, if you're a Gentile, in their perspective, was a child of hell. Now, let me give you a little example here. When the government of Israel invited my wife Kathy and I to plant a church in Jerusalem back in 1981, that's a great story, by the way, which I can't tell you because of lack of time. But it was a most unusual invitation, and we had just built a brand new church in North Toronto. We had about 800 people attending at that point, and the place was just booming with all young families, a lot of children. It was just a great, great situation. But it was an offer I couldn't refuse, not only because it was so unusual, but also because I sensed the Lord was in it. And so in 1981, November of 1981, Kathy and I and our 3 little kids, we moved to Jerusalem. It was a total enculturation process on every level, not the least of it being that the flat that we finally were able to rent or lease was right on the edge of an ultra-religious community in downtown Jerusalem. We didn't know it at the time when we rented it, but these were ultra-Orthodox Jewish men and women and their children living literally just across the fence from us. Boy, did we have a lot to learn. In terms of, for instance, Fridays around 3, 4 in the afternoon, the first time I'll never forget this, I'm driving in our rental car because I hadn't bought a car at that point, back to our flat, and there's these barriers across the road. We can't get into our place. Why is that? Because it's almost Shabbat. You can't drive a car on Shabbat in that community. Okay, had to negotiate with some of the guards at the gate, tell them I'd never do it again. And that I, too, was a man of the cloth, in Hebrew, Chomer, I think it is. But nevertheless, that was just one thing. But one of the things that happened again and again was it would be almost Shabbat. And Shabbat begins on Friday nights when the sun goes down and the big siren sounds over the city. You can hear it everywhere. There'd be a kind of a nervous and shy knock at the door. I go to the door, and there was one of my ultra-Orthodox neighbors in his long black coat and his ringlets and his black hat, and looking very much an Orthodox Jew, asking me in Hebrew if my son or one of my sons would come and turn on their automatic lighting system. Why? Well, the automatic lighting system has failed. Now, their English wasn't very good. My Hebrew was non-existent at that point, and we almost had to use sign language for the first few times. But nevertheless, I dispatched my oldest son, who was 7 at the time, and he went with this man to his house a few blocks away and fiddled with the switches and got their electricity turned on. Why? Because on Shabbat, you cannot light a fire. And to turn on an electrical switch is to light a fire. Okay? But here's the thing. They didn't say it, but I knew this was the case. We were just Gentiles. We have no future in the kingdom of heaven. We're going to hell anyway, so go and light the fire on Shabbat. That was the attitude. So, when I say that in Jesus' time, Gentiles are referred to as children of hell, I can relate to that. I remember many times Kathy and I and our 3 kids would be walking down the street, and my wife's wearing a sundress with exposed upper arms. And if it so happened that 2 or 3 of these ultra-Orthodox men were coming our way, walking along the road, they'd make a point of it. As soon as they got about 10 paces away from Kath and me, they'd do this, shielding their eyes against this worldly woman with her bare upper arms and her beautiful blonde hair. Because in their culture, when a woman is married, she shaves her head and wears a wig. The wig sometimes is far more flamboyant than her hair would be, but that's their culture. Okay. So the Gentile, they wouldn't say it now, but in Jesus' time, were the unwashed. They were, if you will, the dog. They were the offscouring of the earth. No kidding. That's how they saw Gentiles. Okay. So Jesus is saying, you Pharisees go out into the Gentile world to proselytize. And why they're out there proselytizing is beyond me. I don't know why they even want to, have anything to do with Gentiles, but some of them did it. But essentially what they were trying to do was to recreate themselves. And often this is the case in proselytizing. We say we're out there to, share the gospel with people. Yeah. But often that gospel is our gospel. It's not so much about Jesus, it's about our view of what's right and wrong. Do this, you're in. Do that, you're out. Okay. So in a sense, and again, using this imagery that was so current in Jesus' time, he says, what you're doing by laying these legalistic burdens on these poor people is you're making them twice the child of hell that they were before. Okay. So maybe that helps you understand what he's getting at when he uses that expression. I think it's really important, friends. So important. I say this now as a pastor. You know, I've been in the ministry for 54 years. I must have started when I was 5. It's so easy to, gather your skirts about you, to use the old English expression, and turn away from the sinner, and or give the sinner the impression that if they would just change their behavior, then you would accept them. Now, this doesn't mean that we endorse or accept behavior that is clearly proscribed by the Scripture. That's non-negotiable. What I'm talking about here are the man-made laws and traditions that we create and then elevate to the status of biblical authority. I could use a number of expressions or examples. For instance, when I was growing up in a fairly sectarian Christian context, going to movies was like entering the gates of hell. No kidding. Everybody knew that a movie theater had a rapture-proof ceiling. If Jesus comes back while you're in that movie, Jim, he'll miss you, and you won't be taken up to meet him in the air. No kidding. And I remember there's a kind of a minor scandal in our church when I was just a little guy, because some of the teenagers had just gone to see a movie for the first time in their life called The Sound of Music. Well, now we kind of say, what was up with that? Movies are a part of our lives. We don't just go to theaters now. We have Netflix, we have Amazon Prime, we've got all kinds of access to movies through the internet. So what's up with that? Well, what was up with that at the time was this had been made into a rule, a law, if you will, that assumed biblical authority. Do this, and you're out. Do this, and you're in. This is why Jesus was so hard on these guys, because they weren't preaching the kingdom of heaven at all. They were preaching the kingdom of self, the kingdom of the subculture, the kingdom of their little gathering of dogmatic believers. Always a mistake.
With your help, WOW, working for Orphans and Widows, want to give a bicycle to our volunteers in Africa. Volunteers walk hours along winding, dusty roads to visit people who are sick and dying. They bathe and clean them, bring them medicines and food, and lots of care and support. Would you like to wrap a bicycle this Christmas? What a difference a bicycle would make. Instead of 6 hours to get there, they can get there in 2. This Christmas, we're asking you to wrap up a bicycle. Here's how. Donate through our website, by phone or by check.
We'll get back to Jesus' strong words about the Pharisees and the scribes here in a moment, but you just saw a promotion for Wrap Up a Bicycle. WOW, Working for Orphans and Widows, is the international charity my wife and I founded 25 years ago. In response, I believe, to a real sense from the Lord that we need to do something about orphans and widows who are at risk of death from HIV and AIDS back then in sub-Saharan Africa. Well, it's happened between then and now, but the fact of the matter is that HIV and AIDS is still an issue there, even though you don't hear about it. You just don't, but it's very much an issue there. And they're dealing with COVID-19 issues, they're dealing with food insecurity issues, with floods and fires and earthquakes and every adversity under the sun. But This is our third year now where we're doing this Wrap Up a Bicycle promotion for Christmas time. Why are we doing this? We're doing it because everything that we work at in sub-Saharan Africa is through the agency of local church engagement. I believe the church is God's answer to the world. And so being a pastor myself and having a bit of a history and some status there with pastors in general because of my years planting the church and pastoring in Jerusalem, I've been able to mobilize all kinds of churches and pastors with their local church-based volunteers in caring for orphans and widows impacted by HIV and AIDS and other opportunistic infections. And the growth has been phenomenal. It's hard to believe after 25 years just how this ministry has just expanded. You can check us out if you want at Instagram at Wow Mission, or you can go to wowmission.com and get more detail about it. But that Wrap Up a Bicycle thing is really key because it enables our volunteers, who in many cases are going hours out into some of the far-flung rural areas to minister even just to one person who's dying. It'll take them 2 or 3 hours to walk there and 2 or 3 hours to walk back. And, these people have lives too, or, they're doing what they're doing as unto the Lord. A bicycle transforms things. So instead of 6 hours grand total walking back and forth, it's maybe 2 hours, or maybe even less than 2 hours. It makes a huge impact. And so they can't afford a bicycle. No way. They couldn't afford a bicycle, in 10 years of earning what they earn, a few dollars a day, selling tomatoes in the market or whatever. So what I've been doing is encouraging people like you to help them by supporting WOW to purchase bicycles. Bicycles cost $300 each. A repair kit costs $15. And it has transformed the lives of our hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of volunteers with whom we work. So if this kind of strikes your fancy, take it to the Lord and do what you can. The coordinates are always there during these various promotions that we have during the program, and you can very easily access us through those coordinates and provide whatever gifting you want to give. And believe me, it's going to have a big impact. One of the things we've been doing over the last few months is addressing the hunger gap, especially in Malawi and Zambia. But Malawi specifically has a real issue with hunger. Their main crop from which they find their staple meal is maize, which is corn, right? Well, they grow corn, they harvest the corn, and then it's a cash crop. They sell it to Malawians who can afford it, and then they sell it to other African countries. And what happens is for about 4 months of the year, the poor miss out and suffer this hunger gap. And so what we've been doing is we've been supplying some relief funding for hunger, especially over this last year when the combination of cyclones and then drought has seen massive crop failure. And the poor, they're always the ones who suffer the most, are just desperate for some food. They have no food security at all. And so as a part of our quarterly funding for the various ministries that we partner with, in Malawi there, we have one major partner called Somebody Cares Malawi, SCM. We provide them with funding for several things, including the feeding of about 2,000 orphans a month and several thousands of widows, especially elderly widows who have no family. And I was just there recently with Kathy and spoke to several hundreds of Malawians, many of them widows. And I just want to show you a few pics and just check out these beautiful faces. Here, I'm with my interpreter standing in front of a group of maybe a couple hundred widows. Those are all widows there sitting, listening very intently. They had just been outside with me as well. I want you to look at the faces here. Every one of these, is an individual with a name. The Lord knows their name. And some of these are just the godliest women you'd ever want to meet. They will give and give and give when they really have nothing for themselves. And they do it guilelessly and without any expectation of return. Sometimes they look so tired. Sometimes they look very burdened down by life, and you can see it on their faces. Life is tough. These are all elderly widows. And elderly, by the way, in Africa is a relative term. These women would not be seen as elderly in our culture. They would not look as worn by time as they do, because they've lived in adversity their whole lives, and adversity has a way of pushing us down. But they're just wonderful people. Look at this woman here in the foreground. We were praying, and you can see the urgency of her prayer. This gal, she's just, what? What did he just say? Sometimes, I'm the white guy, the big, they call me the Bishop from Jerusalem, which I'm not, but what was that he just said? Because I'm sure there's many times when my scriptural exposition has aspects to it that, are culturally dissonant, and I don't know it, but they know it. I just love these wonderful faces. Sometimes I just want to look and say nothing. See the gal in the middle in the green shirt there? She's obviously tired. So many of these widows, to get to these meetings, have walked 10, 15 kilometers just to be there. And some of them have shoes, and some of them have no shoes. Imagine living your life with not even one pair of shoes. And so those feet you're looking at there right now have walked maybe 10, 12, 15 kilometers just to be in that meeting. But there's something angelic about these women. I just so admired them. There's a kind of a nobility to their bearing, a sense of dignity, and it just thrills me to be able to be a part of it. So, for the last few months, these widows, and many more that I've not been able to show you, every one of them that you see in that picture, we've been able to supply with basic foodstuffs to keep them alive. You know what's interesting about it is that they don't ask. It's the pastor leaders that work with us that do the asking, because they're the ones in leadership, and they, are the ones who are touching base with these people on a daily and weekly basis, and they fully understand the needs that they have. And they share them with us. There's no strong-arm tactics. Maybe there's no need for it, because they know that Kathy and I, we're kind of bathed in compassion. And that's not bragging, it's just simply the case. I look at these special women, these widows, and I see women who've been created in God's image, who have a name, who have a history, and who are deeply loved by their Creator. And Jesus died for them. And of course, they always have opportunity, if they've not had it before we arrive, to come to faith in Christ. And again, there's no strong arm tactics on our part. We just present the gospel, and they say, I want to be a part of this. I want Jesus to be my Savior. I want Him in my life. And they just so easily, like children, just commit their way to the Lord. They may not have education, at least in formal terms, but they have the education of the business of living, the adversities of life, raising children on their own, dealing with sickness, dealing with all kinds of adversity. And in all of that, they are more than a conqueror. They're more than a survivor. They actually can smile and sing and dance and thank God for His mercy. So when you support WOW, that's what you're supporting. And when you support JCT, you're supporting this, because WOW and JCT are part of the same ministry. I'll be back. Often friends like you
are curious about what WOW does with your donations. And as I've often said on the television program, we are concerned about home-based care, especially for those who are dying, orphans and widows, of which there are tens of thousands over the past 23 years. But one of our responsibilities with home-based care is making sure that there's some nourishment available in these homes where care is being provided. And as some of you may recall, in March of this year, or 2023, there was a major cyclone called Freddie that struck Mozambique and Malawi. And Malawi was badly hit. Infrastructure was wiped out, roads, culverts, outside latrines. But the maize crop was severely damaged to the point where the cost of maize, which is a basic food component for Malawian everyday people, has more than doubled. And so our partner on the ground, Somebody Cares, contacted me about an urgent need for maize to help our orphans and widows through this difficult time. And so with your help, we managed to raise enough for a huge amount of maize here. I think this is about $15,000 worth. We need to double this, at least. And as the Lord speaks to your heart, if you can help us with this, wow, what a difference it will make in, as Jesus called them, the lives of the least of these. So thanks for your consideration.
So friends, I took a whole teaching segment just to give you a little background into WOW, Working for Orphans and Widows. And as you can tell, this ministry is very close to my heart. On the ground in sub-Saharan Africa and also in India, we're just trying to be the hands and feet of Jesus, not in a presumptuous way, but in a humble servant way. And then here on JCT, I just try to expose the gospel, the essential infrastructural motivation for these acts of mercy and justice out there in a very difficult world. It's all about righteousness and justice. Right relationship with God, right relationship with neighbor. Love for God, love for neighbor. It's not rocket science, but boy, I'll tell you, when you commit your way to that way of living, which essentially is Jesus' commandment, righteous, just, love for God, love for neighbor, you're on your way to an adventurous life, for sure. Thanks for watching. See you next time.